As Jack outlined there, my topic today is to just focus a little bit on extension we've used to progress genetic improvement on dairy farms. I'm going to keep it real simple and really short. We have three sections, a single slide on the background to where we've been coming from, a number of slides then about the theory of extension and how we applied it to the adoption of EBI, and two slides on the results that we've achieved. And in my talk, I'm going to confine myself solely to genetic improvement in terms of phenotypic or milk production and fertility information is in the paper, as are details on trends in cattle numbers or heifer numbers. So let's start off first of all with a review of where we've come from. This slide here just tells us a little bit about the trends we've observed through the 90s and into the early noughties in terms of milk production and fertility on dairy farms. Over that period of time, and just to put it in context for our international visitors, Ireland is predominantly seasonal milk producer. Most of our cows calve in the springtime of the year. And for us, what's of critical importance is good fertility. It's equally, if not more important, than high milk production, because we know that if we can calve our cows early enough in the spring, they produce milk cheaply off grass, and because they get a long lactation, they deliver lots of milk solids as well. And throughout the 90s and throughout the 80s and 90s and into the early part of the noughties, most of the cows that were bred in the country were bred to the RBI system until around 1998 or 1999. Therefore, the cows and heifers in milk through the 90s rather, and early part of the first decade of the 21st century, the heifers and cows that were born and bred in those years were reflective of the previous breeding index we had, the RBI. It was a single focus index, so it focused solely on milk production and increasing milk production. And in doing so, it achieved the same, as this data shows. Because we can see from this analysis of 14 dairy farms matched throughout the years, milk production per cow was increasing annually, or in total by about 12% per cow. And using the Moore-Park system to model milk sales production for a static herd size, it resulted in a milk sales increase of around €24,000 between 1990 to 2003 for the same size of herd. So milk production was on the rise on a per cow basis. Unfortunately, in tandem with this increase, we'd underestimated the antagonistic relationship that exists between milk production and fertility. And a secondary effect of this index was a reduction in fertility, or rather an increase, or is reflected here as an increase in replacement rate. And over that period of time, replacement rate on this matched sample of herds, and just to remind you, these herds reflected closely what happened at national level. Replacement rate increased substantially, from 16 to 27%. So of the additional €24,000 in milk sales, replacement costs rose. They eroded €16,000 of additional money off that higher milk sales production, and ultimately compromised profit. Further analysis around the year 2000 by a group from ICBF, when they modelled farm profit, found that the single most important factor affecting profit was obviously going to be milk price, but it was followed closely by changes in replacement rate. That's where we were coming from. Now, I have a master's degree in extension, so I've spent a lot of time looking at the work of Everett Rogers. And Rogers describes the adoption of innovation, or the adoption of any innovation, as a 5-step process. In this case, the innovation we're talking about is EBI. Step 1 has to do with knowledge, 2 with persuasion, step 3 with decision making, 4 with implementation, and 5 with confirmation of the adoption you've just pursued. And it's in that context I'm going to describe how EBI is being adopted on Irish dairy farms. Starting off with knowledge. In step 1, or in the knowledge step, farmers were exposed to an innovation for the first time, in this case EBI. We tried to publicise EBI in the early noughties to as wide an extent as possible, and ultimately we decided upon a national breeding competition. And the first year of that competition was 2005. The competition was heavily sponsored by Rabobank and heavily publicised as well by the Farmers' Journal in particular. And at the inaugural event, which took place in County Waterford, not in Cork, over 2,000 dairy farmers attended that event, about 15% of the dairy farming population of the country. And a particular feature of that event was the high EBI group of cows, and their milk production and fertility performance was recorded. So this was giving farmers a taster for it, of what EBI was about. Step 2 in the whole innovation adoption process has to do with persuasion. And when it came to persuasion, the farmer is actively pursuing the innovation. A number of methodologies were employed to ensure that he received all the information he required on it. The farming press, farmer meetings and walks, and farmer advisor contacts. Now, by advisor, I'm using advisor in the broadest sense. It encouraged or was involved not just Teagasc advisors, ICBF personnel and the local breeding advisors were also heavily involved, for the various AI companies were also heavily involved at this stage in the process. And we know from our own analysis subsequently that Teagasc advisors and Teagasc-led discussion groups and all discussion groups will significantly influence adoption of newer innovations. And at the time, one of those innovations was EBI. In step 3 of the process, we move from having gathered the knowledge to decision-making about the innovation, in this case EBI. Farmers decide, yes, this is for me, or no, it's not. They can decide to adopt or reject it, and in doing so, they will consult with a range of people who are closest to them with regard to the innovation. So for EBI, it will be farmer peers, and it will also be Teagasc advisors and breeding consultants. And in advance of the breeding season for quite a number of years, we've engaged with our own Teagasc advisors and taught them about or suggested to them what our targets will be for the coming breeding season. And in the earlier years of it, we met with the breeding companies and explained to them what the Teagasc and ICBF targets would have been as well. Step 4 is where implementation, to some extent, of the innovation takes place. The farmer has decided to adopt the innovation, and he'll try and use some of it. To put a little bit of peer pressures on farmers at this time, particularly those in discussion groups, a suite of discussion group reports were generated. And these reports allowed farmers to see the numbers and the quality of straws that their discussion group peers were using. And we also had individual reports where farmers could track the genetic progress being made on their farm with the genetic progress being made on a national and in some cases a cooperative basis as well. And step 5, the final step, is confirmation. At this stage, the farmer can decide to use this innovation to its fullest potential. In doing so, one of the changes we brought about came through the national breeding competition, which for the years 08 to 11 changed from being an individual to a group competition. Between those years, we would have interviewed around 75 groups each year, critiqued their breeding performance, and analysed the results that they were achieving, and enormous progress was made in that way. A second thing we did was, instead of it being an individual farmer contest, it had moved to the discussion group contest. So group members hosted the farm walks that took place, and in addition, group members, rather than breeding experts, such as this guy here, this farmer here, they presented most of the data that was presented on the day. And anecdotally, we were told that this information made it hugely significant and easy to follow, and confirmed the value of EBI because there was massive credibility in presenting data through the farmer members of groups. We also, at each of those open days, ran events where we stages where we looked at the high versus low EBI cows within the group, and their performance in terms of milk production and fertility was critiqued as well. Rogers also says that there are a number of factors that will make an innovation easier or more difficult to adopt. There are 5 factors, in fact, and all of them helped us to ensure that EBI has been adopted more widely on a national basis. The first one there is the advantage to the user, and the message from Teagasc on that would have been that high EBI cows leave more money, so it is a fairly simple message. The second factor has to do with triability. If an innovation can be tried in a small part rather than being adopted in whole, it'll be more often adopted. And with EBI, it was quite easy to experiment with a different sire compared with the normal sires you've been using. So a high EBI sire off the active bull list could have been selected. The third one was the innovation observable? And the answer is yes. because ICBF and ourselves worked together to produce reports which showed farmers their most profitable cows from a milk and fertility perspective. And those reports were easily accessible to dairy farmers. EBI is also compatible because existing users can just switch from lower to higher EBI sires. And to keep the message as simple and as communicable as possible, our message as Teagasc advisors on the ground would have been to select sires from the active bull list. This is the list that contains the highest EBI sires that are most widely available for dairy farmers. So these factors help to make the EBI message an easier one to adopt. Now, one of the other challenges, one of the other things that happen is we all know time moves on and things change. And it was interesting, I was listening to one of our colleagues there this morning, and he talked about genomics. And in the initial stages, genomics were not widely adopted in Germany, it was actually. Early adopters of EBI had one complaint. They said we haven't enough high quality bulls available to us. So in the early 90s, to ensure more rapid development, the Gene Ireland programme kicked off to fast track or to move in a more organised manner the breeding of the next generation of EBIs, of high EBI sires. In 2009, it was further innovation took place, and in early 2009, genomics came on the scene. With that, its own challenges were created, and the challenge that we had was to develop a single, consistent message. And that message was that if you use genomics, number one, we suggested that in most cases people should consider the use of genomics because clearly the bulls were of higher genetic merit than many of the daughter-proven sires. Not of them all, but than of many of them. We suggested that teams of such bulls should be used rather than individuals. And in its first year, a third of the dairy AI used in Ireland came from genomically proven sires. This increased over the years and it stands at 47% of the AI used nationally in 2011. In doing so, it has driven the EBI used on the average herd, or on the average of all the sires used, from 144 to 181. So it's been a help in driving further genetic gain on the national herd. Finally, I just want to summarise with a couple of slides, the results. And my first slide here is a simple graph. It shows the EBI of heifer calves born between 1990 and 2012. And we can divide it into three parts. Throughout the 1990s, the total genetic gain over that period of time was €16. This increased to €28 between 2000 and 2010. And for 2011 and 2012, the total genetic gain has been €30, or in other words, not only is genomic or genetic merit or genetic gain increasing, but it's increasing at an increasingly rapid rate. In the last 2 years, it's increased by an average of as much as it increased over the whole 1990 decade. And the second thing is to do with the milk and fertility components, genetic components of the EBI breakdown. And the green line here represents the milk production side of the genetic merit of animals born by year of birth. And I said earlier on that we saw increasing milk production from that sample of herds we looked at. And this follows closely what we're seeing from a genetic perspective over that period of time, between 1990 and 2003. Genetic merit from milk production was on the rise. We also said that fertility was declining. And you can see from this graph here that genetic merit for fertility, that's the blue line with the blue triangles, was on the decline. Okay. Since then, we've seen a continuing rise in genetic merit for milk production, albeit at a slower pace to the pre-2000 period. And the second thing we've seen is a restoration of the fertility sub-index. And the figure for 2012 there refers to the heifer calves born in 2012. So over the next number of years, those animals will start to come into the herds. And as Donna's predicted, we would expect that with good genetic merit and better milk solids potential, we will see a herd that has been equally as fertile and with greater milk production potential than the herd of the past. And just in conclusion, just a couple of short points. The first point is that promotion of EBI and its merits by Teagasc is ongoing, just as development of the index is ongoing. It is and will continue to be incorporated into Teagasc's dairy programme, and as changes come to the EBI, we'll continue to modify our advice, continue to promote it across the industry, and hope for further increases in genetic gain over the next number of years. Jack,
okay,
thanks.
thank you very much, George.